I went into the woods that morning planning to spend just a few hours hiking. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, just a quick walk to clear my head before the week started. I had been feeling tired of everything. Work, noise, screens, people. The woods had always been my way to breathe again. I'd driven out to a stretch of forest I'd found on an old map, not far from an abandoned fire road that hadn't been used in years. I figured it would be quiet. It was early autumn, and the air still had that mix of warmth and chill, cool in the shade, warm when the sun broke through. The sky was clear, and the light had that golden, soft tone that only happens before noon. I parked my car beside a small dirt clearing where grass had grown over the tire ruts. I threw on my backpack, locked up, and started walking into the trees. The first mile or so felt peaceful. The forest floor was covered in leaves and pine needles that muffled my steps. The smell of damp earth and bark was everywhere. Every now and then, I'd hear the wind moving through the tops of the trees or the sound of something small darting through the undergrowth. I passed a fallen log covered in moss, a cluster of mushrooms growing from its side. Everything felt quiet and still, the kind of quiet that makes your thoughts louder. I didn't follow an official trail. There were faint signs of an old path. The way leaves were worn down, the ground slightly smoother, but it wasn't marked. I liked that. It made it feel like I was deeper in nature, away from everyone. I walked for maybe 2 hours, taking turns that looked interesting, not really keeping track of the direction. That was my first mistake. By the time I realized I didn't know where I was, the sun had shifted high above the trees. I pulled out my phone, but there was no signal. The battery was already low from listening to music earlier, so I turned it off to save it. I told myself it was fine, that I just needed to retrace my steps. But when I started back, things didn't look the same. Every cluster of trees looked identical, every log, every slope of dirt. I kept thinking I recognized certain rocks or shapes, but they led me nowhere. After about 20 minutes of walking in what I thought was the right direction, I came across something that made my stomach sink. A piece of blue tape tied around a branch. I hadn't seen it before. It wasn't old either. It was fresh, clean, and bright against the bark. Someone had put it there, and not long ago. I stood there for a while, trying to figure out why it was there. Maybe a survey marker, or a hunter's trail mark. I kept walking, slower now, more alert. A few minutes later, I found another piece of tape, this time red, tied lower down. Then another one, yellow. They appeared every few trees, always tied at slightly different heights, sometimes low to the ground, sometimes at eye level. It didn't feel random. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just part of a logging survey, or maybe someone marking paths for research. But the deeper I went, the more I noticed how unnatural the pattern looked. Like they weren't marking a trail but circling something. I came across a small clearing with a few tree stumps and piles of dry branches. The ground was covered with disturbed dirt, like it had been dug up and tamped down again. I thought maybe it was where someone had set up camp, but there was no trash, no sign of a fire, no footprints. Just those bright pieces of tape tied around the perimeter. I felt something tighten in my chest. I turned around and started walking faster in what I thought was the direction of my car. My breathing got heavier, but not from exhaustion, from the creeping sense that I wasn't supposed to be there. The woods were quiet, too quiet. No birds, no wind. The air felt thick and still. Every now and then, I think I heard something faint. A branch crack, the rustle of leaves. But every time I stopped to listen, it went silent. Then, out of nowhere, I saw something half buried under a fallen branch. At first, I thought it was trash. Maybe a piece of clothing someone dropped. But when I bent down, I realized it was a boot. Old, worn down, and covered in dirt. The laces were frayed, and one of the eyelets had rusted. It looked like it had been there a while, but not long enough to rot. I looked around, suddenly hyper-aware of how alone I was. There was nothing else near it, no sign of who it belonged to. Just that single boot sitting in the dirt. I didn't touch it. I didn't even want to get close. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on it like it might move. My mouth had gone dry. I started walking again, this time in a straight line, not caring which way it went as long as it got me out of there. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my neck. I kept thinking about the tape, the clearing, the boot, all scattered, all wrong. After maybe 30 minutes, I heard it. A sound that froze me mid-step. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The sound of a metal clang, like something hitting against steel. Once, then again, then silence. Came from somewhere ahead of me. I didn't move for a long time. The forest was dead still again. I felt that cold crawling feeling down my spine. That primal sense that something was watching me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it, the weight of something unseen. I turned around and started walking fast, then faster, almost running. I didn't care about the direction anymore. Branches whipped at my arms. Leaves crunched under my boots, but I just kept going. I stopped only when I saw a faint slope in the ground ahead. A ridge. I scrambled up it, breathing hard, and when I reached the top, I saw something that almost made me drop to my knees. Through the trees, far below, I could see the faint shimmer of metal, my car. It wasn't close, maybe half a mile away, but it was there. I could see the dirt clearing where I'd parked, the way sunlight hit the windshield. Relief washed through me so strong I felt lightheaded. I started down the slope as fast as I could, half sliding on the loose dirt. The woods around me stayed silent, but I could still feel that tension, like the trees were holding their breath. When I finally broke through the last line of trees and saw my car up close, I didn't waste a second. I threw my backpack inside and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. As I pulled out of the clearing, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. On one of the trees near where I'd parked, there was a piece of tape, bright blue, just like the ones I'd seen deeper in the woods. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived. It hadn't been there before. I drove the entire way home in silence, my eyes flicking to the mirror every few seconds. I kept expecting to see something, a figure, a flash of color, movement, but there was nothing, just the empty road and the blur of trees. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The markings, the clearing, the tape near my car. Someone had been out there, marking paths or boundaries or something I didn't understand. Someone who had been close enough to where I parked to leave a sign without me noticing. A few days later, I checked online for information about the area. I found an old post from a hunting forum, people warning each other to avoid that section of the forest because someone's been setting traps. No one ever explained what kind. Just stories about missing dogs, strange markings, and the sound of tools or metal echoing in the woods. That was enough for me. I haven't gone hiking alone since then. Sometimes, when I'm driving past wooded areas, I still look for flashes of color through the trees. Blue, red, yellow. And sometimes I swear I see them. Little pieces of fabric tied to branches, just high enough that you wouldn't notice them unless you were really looking. I don't know what they mean. Maybe they're harmless. Maybe they're warnings. But I'll never forget the feeling I had that day, deep in those silent woods, surrounded by marks I couldn't explain and sounds that didn't belong. I got lucky finding my way back. I know that now, because whoever was out there marking those trees, they knew those woods better than I ever could. And I don't think they wanted anyone else finding their way out. It was late October when I decided to go into the woods alone. The air had that sharp, dry chill that cuts through your clothes, and every breath came out as a thin cloud in front of me. The trees had mostly lost their leaves by then, leaving the forest open and exposed. The ground was covered with a thick layer of brown leaves that made a soft crunch with every step. I wanted peace and quiet, a weekend to myself before winter came in full. I had done short solo trips before, but this one felt different right from the start. I left my truck parked at the edge of an old logging road that wound deep into the hills. The plan was simple. Hike in a few miles, set up camp near a stream I saw on a map, spend the night, and head back the next day. I had enough gear, a tent, sleeping bag, flashlight, a small stove, and some food. It was already past noon when I started walking, the sun sitting low behind a dull gray sky. The light was dim even though it wasn't cloudy, like the world was losing color as the season changed. The forest was completely silent except for the steady rustle under my boots. Every now and then, I'd hear a dry branch snap far off, but it never repeated. I could smell the faint scent of smoke in the air, maybe from someone's camp miles away or a farmhouse burning wood for heat. The deeper I went, the colder it got. The wind picked up and brushed through the tall, bare trees, making a hollow whistling sound that seemed to follow me. After about an hour and a half, I reached the stream. The water was shallow and clear, running fast over smooth rocks. The banks were covered in yellow leaves, pressed flat from the moisture. I found a small patch of flat ground a few yards back from the water and started setting up my tent. The ground was cold and hard. My fingers went numb as I pushed the stakes in. When I finished, I gathered a pile of sticks and twigs to start a fire. It took me longer than usual to get it going because the air was damp, but once the flames caught, that small orange light felt like safety in all that grayness. As I sat there eating from a small metal bowl, I noticed how quickly the sun dropped behind the tree line. It wasn't even 6 p.m., and the light was already fading. The temperature fell fast too. The forest changed with it. The stillness became heavier, like the woods were holding their breath. I could see my own shadow moving faintly against the trees from the flicker of the fire. It was the kind of silence where you could hear your own heartbeat if you sat still enough. I tried to enjoy it, but there was something unsettling about how empty it felt. I hadn't seen a single person since leaving the truck. No distant voices, no hikers, nothing. Just the endless woods. After eating, I added more wood to the fire and sat staring into it. The flames made the branches around me glow and move in strange patterns. I could smell the smoke on my jacket and hair. Time passed slowly. I must have sat there for over an hour doing nothing, just listening to the occasional crack from the fire and the faint rush of the stream. When I finally crawled into my tent, I zipped the flap shut and lay inside my sleeping bag, trying to get warm. My flashlight hung from the top loop, giving off a soft yellow glow. I could hear the faint hum of wind outside, but not much else. I must have drifted into a half-sleep because the next thing I noticed was a sound. Faint, steady, coming from outside. At first, I thought it was the stream again, but then it changed. It was footsteps, slow, careful, moving through leaves. I froze completely. The sound wasn't loud, but it was close enough that I could tell it wasn't an animal. It had a rhythm, 2 steps, a pause, another 2 steps. My chest tightened, and I stopped breathing, listening as hard as I could. The steps came from behind my tent, somewhere near the trees. They stopped for a moment, then started again, circling slightly to the side. I could feel my pulse in my throat. It went on like that for maybe a minute. Then everything went silent again. I waited, not daring to move. My body was stiff, my hands clutching the edges of my sleeping bag. The silence stretched out so long that I started to think maybe it had just been the wind or my imagination. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it again, this time closer. Leaves shifting, faint crunch. Someone was out there. I didn't move or make a sound. I just lay there, staring at the thin wall of fabric that separated me from the outside. The steps came right up to the tent. I could hear them stop. I didn't breathe. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard a long, slow exhale, like someone trying to stay quiet. The sound was so faint I thought it was my own breathing at first. But it wasn't. After that, nothing happened. The sound faded, and the steps slowly moved away into the distance. I stayed awake for hours, too scared to even look outside. I watched the flashlight beam flicker until it died on its own, leaving me in total darkness. I must have drifted into sleep sometime before dawn, because when I opened my eyes again, sunlight was cutting through the tent walls. I sat up slowly, every muscle tense. The fire had gone out completely, and the air inside the tent was freezing. When I unzipped the flap and stepped out, I noticed it right away. Footprints. Big ones, clear in the damp ground. They started near the trees, came straight up to my tent, circled halfway around, and then disappeared toward the stream. They weren't animal tracks. They were human. I could see the tread marks from a boot. I followed them a few feet before they vanished into the rocky bank near the water. My whole body went cold again. Whoever it was, they'd been standing right outside while I was inside that tent. I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so bad I dropped things more than once. The forest looked completely different in daylight. Empty, still, like nothing had happened. But I could feel it. That same quiet, that same weight in the air. When I started hiking back, I kept checking behind me. The woods looked endless in every direction, and it felt like something was moving just out of sight. I walked faster than I ever had, following my GPS until I finally reached the old logging road again. Seeing my truck felt like a miracle. I threw my pack in the back seat and climbed in, locking the doors immediately. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked pale and drained. I sat there for a long time before I even started the engine. I just kept thinking about those footsteps, that slow movement outside, the sound of someone's breath just a few feet away. When I finally pulled out, I looked down the dirt road one last time. The trees swayed gently in the wind, nothing else moving. But about 100 yards in, on the side of the road, I saw something small, a shape hanging from a branch. I slowed down just enough to look closer. It was a piece of red fabric tied in a knot, fluttering lightly in the breeze. I didn't stop. I pressed the gas harder and didn't look back again. Even now, weeks later, I still think about that night. The sound of those steps, the way they stopped right behind my tent. I keep trying to tell myself it was just another camper or someone passing through, but deep down, I know it wasn't that simple. The woods were empty. No tire tracks, no voices, no smoke. Whoever it was had been there for a reason, and they knew I was alone. I've gone camping plenty of times in my life, but I've never felt fear like that before. Not from darkness, not from being lost. From knowing that someone was there, close enough to touch the tent, waiting in the cold silence of late October, and I never even saw their face. That was the last time I ever camped alone. I went into the woods that weekend to clear my head. That's all I wanted, a quiet place away from everything. I had been stressed from work, tired of hearing phones ring, tired of seeing people every day. The woods always felt like a reset for me. I didn't go to any official campsite, though. I wanted somewhere no one else would go. Somewhere quiet enough that I could only hear my own breathing. I drove for hours until I found an old dirt road that looked barely used. My GPS didn't even show it, just a thin, unmarked line that led straight into the forest. I followed it for about 15 minutes until it became too rough for my car. I parked on the shoulder, grabbed my backpack, and walked in. The air was heavy with that earthy smell of wet soil and pine. Every step made soft crunches on the layer of fallen leaves. I didn't have a real plan. I just walked deeper until the sounds of the road disappeared. I could hear the faint hum of insects and the occasional rustle from the wind. The trees were tall, close together, and their branches created a green roof above me. The light that came through was patchy, moving when the wind blew. The ground was uneven, full of roots that caught my boots and made me stumble a few times. I remember thinking how easy it would be to get lost out there. After maybe 2 hours, I found a small clearing, flat ground, soft soil, and enough space for my tent. It looked perfect. I dropped my backpack and started setting up. I wasn't rushing, just moving slow, enjoying the quiet. By the time I finished, the sun was already lowering, and the air had that evening chill to it. I gathered dry sticks, started a fire, and sat down to eat. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was almost too quiet. Usually, even in deep woods, you hear things. Birds, crickets, the wind moving leaves. But here, there was nothing. Just the faint crackle of the fire and my own breathing. I tried to ignore it. Sometimes the forest goes quiet when the temperature drops, I told myself. I finished my food, watched the flames for a while, and then got into my tent. The inside smelled like plastic and dirt. I laid out my sleeping bag, used my backpack as a pillow, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. I kept hearing faint noises. Not loud, just enough to keep my brain awake. A stick cracking, something brushing against dry leaves. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer or raccoon, but then I realized the sounds weren't random. They came in short bursts, then stopped completely. Then, after a few minutes, started again, closer this time. I held my breath and listened. I could hear something moving around the clearing, slow, careful. Every time it stepped, I could hear the weight, heavy, steady. Not an animal. It sounded too deliberate. I stayed perfectly still. The tent fabric was thin, and even though I couldn't see out, I could feel how close the sound was. It circled the tent once, slow, almost cautious, and then stopped on the side where my head was. I didn't move for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I thought whoever was outside could hear it. The fire had gone down by then, so the only light was the faint orange glow through the tent. I watched the shadows shifting on the fabric. Nothing moved for a long time. Eventually, I told myself it was my imagination. Maybe I'd heard the wind or a small animal. I forced my eyes shut and waited for sleep to come. I woke up before dawn, the air freezing cold, my sleeping bag damp with condensation. When I stepped outside, the fire was dead, and the whole clearing was coated in a thin mist. Everything was still. I tried not to think about the noises from the night before, but then I saw them. Footprints. Not mine. Bigger. Deeper. The ground near my tent had fresh mud prints that led out from the trees, circled my tent twice, and then went off in another direction. My stomach dropped. Whoever had been out there hadn't just passed by. They'd been watching, standing right outside while I was inside the tent. I felt sick. I wanted to pack and leave immediately, but it was still early, and the mist was too thick to see far. So I sat by the fire pit, trying to calm down, waiting for the sun to come up. When the light finally broke through the fog, I started packing fast. Every sound in the woods made me jump. My hands were shaking as I stuffed everything into my backpack. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see someone standing between the trees. When I finally slung the pack onto my shoulders and started walking, I realized I couldn't tell exactly which way I had come from. Everything looked the same: trees, rocks, and fallen logs. I picked what I thought was the right direction and started walking fast. After about 20 minutes, I saw something strange on the ground ahead. A small pile of stones, stacked neatly, almost like a marker. It didn't look natural. I hadn't made it, and I hadn't seen it before. I stepped around it and kept walking, but a few minutes later, I found another one. Then another. All of them built the same way, 3 or 4 stones stacked carefully in the middle of the trail. It felt deliberate, like someone had put them there for a reason. The farther I went, the thicker the woods got. The trees were closer together now, and the air smelled like wet moss. My boots sank into the soft ground. I checked my phone a few times, but there was no signal. I thought about using the compass app, but the needle was spinning wildly, refusing to point steady. I started to panic then. I could feel the sweat building under my shirt, even though the air was cold. My breathing got faster, and I realized I'd been walking uphill for a while. When I stopped to rest, I looked around and saw something that made my chest tighten. My own footprints. The same tread pattern, the same direction. I'd walked in a circle. That was when I heard it again. That same sound from last night, slow steps, somewhere behind me. I froze and turned around, staring into the trees. I couldn't see anyone, but I could hear them. The sound stopped when I did, started again when I moved. It felt like whoever it was didn't care if I knew anymore. I started walking faster, pushing through branches, slipping on wet leaves. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. After what felt like an hour, I came across something new, an old hunting cabin. It was small, half-rotted, with broken boards and a collapsed roof. I didn't plan to stop, but I needed a second to think. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on broken glass. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of mold. There was an old chair, a rusted stove, and walls covered in graffiti. One of the walls had a strange pattern of scratches, long vertical lines, as if someone had dragged something sharp across it over and over again. I stayed there for maybe 5 minutes before I heard footsteps again, closer this time. I looked through the cracks in the wall but saw nothing. The noise moved around the outside, slow and steady. I didn't wait to see what it was. I grabbed my pack and bolted out the back door, running until my lungs burned. I didn't care which direction I was going anymore. I just wanted out. Eventually, I saw light through the trees. Not sunlight, open space. I pushed through the brush and came out onto a dirt service road. My knees almost gave out when I saw it. I recognized it. It was the same road I had driven in on. My car was still parked there, covered in dust and leaves. I didn't even stop to rest. I threw my pack into the back seat, got in, and started the engine. As I pulled away, I looked once in the rearview mirror. Just for a second. There was movement near the tree line. Someone standing there, still, half hidden by shadows. I couldn't see their face, couldn't make out any details. Just a shape watching as I drove off. I didn't stop driving until I hit the highway. Only then did I let myself breathe. My hands were still shaking, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. For weeks afterward, I couldn't sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that shape standing by the trees or hear those slow, heavy steps outside my tent. I kept thinking about those footprints, the stone piles, the way someone had moved around my camp so quietly I hadn't noticed until it was too late. I know there was no ghost, no monster, nothing supernatural. It was just someone out there, maybe living off the land, maybe watching people who wandered too deep. But that's what makes it worse. Because whoever that was, they were real. They had come close enough to circle my tent, close enough to leave their prints in the mud. I still go hiking sometimes, but never alone. And I never go off marked trails anymore. Every time I pass through quiet woods and the wind dies down, I listen, really listen, just to make sure I don't hear those same slow footsteps again. It was supposed to be a short weekend trip. Nothing fancy, just 2 days out in the woods to clear my head. I'd been feeling burned out from work and wanted some peace, so I packed up my gear and drove out to a national forest a few hours away. I didn't plan on going deep, just far enough to get away from the noise of cars and people. I parked at a small gravel pull-off, threw my backpack over my shoulder, and started walking in around mid-afternoon. The trail wasn't marked, but I had my GPS and a printed map. I figured I'd camp by a small creek I saw on the map. Maybe fish a little, maybe just sit around the fire doing nothing. The first few hours were peaceful. The air was cool, the forest quiet except for wind and birds. The ground was covered with pine needles that muffled my steps. The smell of damp wood and soil was strong after a recent rain. I remember thinking it was perfect, exactly what I needed. Around 5 p.m., I found a flat area near the creek and set up camp. My tent faced the water, and I built a small fire ring with some stones. I cooked a quick meal, watched the sun go down, and listened to the sound of flowing water. It was one of those evenings that makes you forget you even have a phone or a job waiting back home. By the time darkness came, the forest was silent in that heavy, almost oppressive way. No frogs, no crickets, just wind moving through the trees. It didn't bother me at first. I'd camped enough to know that animals tend to quiet down once night settles. I threw some more wood on the fire and sat by it for a while, staring into the flames. Eventually, I crawled into my tent around 10 p.m. The sound of the creek was steady and calming. I fell asleep quickly. Sometime during the night, I woke up for no real reason. It was that half-alert state where your mind isn't fully awake yet, but something pulls you out of sleep. I lay still, trying to figure out what woke me. The fire was mostly out, just a faint orange glow through the tent fabric. I could still hear the creek. But under that, I thought I heard something else. Faint movement, like soft steps through leaves. Slow, deliberate steps, not random animal noises. At first, I told myself it was probably a deer or a raccoon. I turned on my side and waited, listening. The sound stopped for a while, then started again. Closer this time. I could hear the distinct crunch of dried twigs. It wasn't fast. It sounded like someone was carefully trying not to make noise. I held my breath and listened harder. The steps circled the tent slowly, stopping every few seconds. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. I didn't move. After what felt like minutes, the sound faded away toward the trees. I stayed awake, staring at the faint light inside the tent. I didn't hear anything else after that, but I couldn't sleep again. I stayed still until the first gray light of morning seeped through the fabric. When I finally unzipped the tent and stepped outside, the forest was quiet and empty. There were no signs of anyone or anything around. I checked the ground near my tent out of curiosity. The soil was soft and damp, and sure enough, there were footprints. Not clear shoe prints, but indents that were definitely human-shaped. The size looked adult, maybe a man's. I followed them a few feet until they disappeared into harder ground. I remember standing there, feeling that uneasy chill crawl up my back. The nearest campground or road was miles away. I didn't like the thought that someone had been out there walking around my tent in the middle of the night. I thought about packing up right then, but it was early, and the sun was just coming up through the trees. I told myself maybe a hiker had gotten lost and wandered by. The explanation didn't feel right, but it was easier to believe than anything else. I spent the morning fishing and trying to relax. The day passed slowly. The woods looked different after that. Less peaceful, more watchful. By evening, I was on edge again. I built another fire, this time keeping it bigger. I moved my tent closer to it, thinking the light might keep animals away or whoever else. As darkness fell, the quiet came back, that heavy stillness that made me hyper-aware of every sound. I sat by the fire for a long time, staring into the trees. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement, small flickers of shadow between trunks, too far to make out. It might have been my imagination, or maybe the firelight playing tricks. Around midnight, I decided to stay awake for a while just to be sure. I sat there with my flashlight and knife beside me. Hours passed. Nothing happened. I started to think maybe I'd overreacted the night before. Then, just when I was beginning to feel tired again, I heard that same slow crunching sound. From the same direction, the woods behind my tent. This time, I turned off the flashlight and crouched near the fire, trying to listen. The sound grew closer, moving through the brush, slow and steady. My stomach dropped. It wasn't an animal. The steps were too careful, too even. I could make out the sound of fabric brushing against branches, like someone's clothes. The firelight reached only a few yards out. Beyond that, it was pitch black. The sound stopped right at the edge of that circle of light. I could feel eyes on me, even though I couldn't see anyone. I picked up my flashlight and shined it straight ahead. Nothing, just trees and shadows. But the feeling didn't go away. Whoever or whatever was there was waiting, just beyond the light. I held still for several minutes, sweeping the light back and forth. Then I heard it. A quick rustle, like someone moving fast away through the brush. I caught a glimpse of something pale, maybe a shirt or skin, before it disappeared behind a tree. My chest tightened. That was enough. I grabbed my pack and doused the fire with water. My hands were shaking so badly that I spilled half of it. I stuffed everything into my bag without caring how it fit and started walking toward where I came from. The trail was faint in the dark, but I used my GPS and flashlight to find my way. Every sound made me jump. Snapping branches, the wind, even my own footsteps. I kept checking behind me, certain I'd see someone following. A few times, I thought I heard something moving behind me, but when I stopped, it stopped too. That was the worst part, that silence that matched me. It took hours to reach the road. By the time I got to my car, the sky was turning light again. I threw my gear in the back and just sat there for a while, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to catch my breath. The woods behind me looked calm, harmless even, like nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the image of those footprints circling my tent, the sound of slow steps in the dark. When I finally drove away, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A small clearing off the side of the road where another path disappeared into the woods. For a second, I thought I saw a figure standing there, just barely visible between the trees. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't stop. I drove straight home and didn't tell anyone about it for a long time. I checked the news later that week, just out of curiosity, to see if there'd been any missing person reports or weird sightings in that area. Nothing. No reports, no hikers, nothing. I still don't know who or what was out there those nights. Maybe someone living off the grid. Maybe just a drifter. Or maybe someone who liked to watch campers from the dark. All I know is that since that trip, I've never camped alone again. I still go hiking, but I stick to marked trails now, and I make sure I'm never the only one out there when the sun goes down. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I'll hear the faint sound of footsteps in my head, slow, careful, circling. I tell myself it's just my mind replaying that weekend, but deep down, I know that sound too well to mistake it for imagination. It's the sound of someone who knows exactly how to move through the woods without being seen. It was early evening when I decided to head into the woods. I had been driving through a rural stretch of highway for hours, planning to stop somewhere quiet to rest for the night before finishing the drive the next day. The sun was low, orange light cutting through the trees, and the air had that late autumn bite to it. I wasn't camping for fun, just a quick overnight stop to get off the road. I had a small tent and sleeping bag in the trunk, nothing fancy, just what I needed to make it through the night. I pulled off onto a narrow dirt road that looked like it hadn't been used in a while. The ground was covered in wet leaves, and branches hung low over the path, scraping across the roof of my car as I drove deeper in. I must have gone a mile or two before I found a flat spot wide enough to pull over. The forest around me was thick, silent, and darker than I expected for that time of day. I shut off the engine and stepped out, feeling the cold hit me right away. The air smelled like pine, wet bark, and distant smoke. I could hear nothing except my own movements, not even birds. The quiet was strange, heavy, like the air itself was holding still. I grabbed my pack and flashlight, moved about 20 yards off the road, and found a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The ground was soft from layers of leaves and moss, perfect for setting up the tent. I worked quickly, setting the stakes and unrolling the sleeping bag. The light was fading fast, and within half an hour the forest turned dark blue, then almost black. Once I got a small fire going, the feeling of being alone hit me. The firelight flickered against the trees, and every shadow seemed to move just a little when I wasn't looking directly at it. The flames popped occasionally, breaking the silence, but beyond that there was nothing. No wind, no crickets, nothing. I sat there eating from a can, watching my breath fog in the air. After eating, I added a few more pieces of wood and leaned back, staring at the fire. I started to feel uneasy, not for any specific reason, just the kind of slow-building discomfort that comes when you realize you are miles away from anyone. My phone had no signal. I hadn't passed a single house on the drive-in. If something happened, no one would know. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the sound of the fire. But that's when I noticed something strange. There was a faint sound coming from beyond the light, a single slow crunch, like someone stepping on a pile of leaves. I froze and listened. The sound didn't repeat for a few seconds, then came again, deliberate, spaced apart, too heavy for a small animal. I turned off my flashlight to let my eyes adjust. The darkness beyond the fire was thick, and I couldn't see far. I told myself it was probably a deer, or maybe a branch falling somewhere, but something about it didn't fit. The pattern was too controlled. It wasn't random movement. It sounded like footsteps. I sat still for a long time, waiting for it to stop, and eventually it did. I told myself it was nothing and got into my tent once the fire burned low. Inside, it was pitch dark except for a faint orange glow from the dying fire outside. The ground was cold beneath me, and every tiny noise made my stomach tighten. I laid there, trying to calm down, telling myself over and over that I was just tired. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. I didn't know why at first, but then I heard it again, that same slow, steady crunch of leaves. It was close this time. My heart started pounding instantly. The sound came from the side of the tent, maybe 10 feet away, moving slowly, like someone circling. I held my breath. It stopped for a few seconds, and in that silence, I could hear the faint crack of a branch under weight. Then, just as slow, the footsteps moved again, this time behind me, near where my car was parked. The tent fabric was so thin I felt like I could hear my own pulse through it. I didn't move an inch. I didn't even unzip the flap to look. After a while, it stopped again. The woods went silent, completely silent. I laid there for what felt like an hour, my muscles stiff from not moving. I must have fallen asleep at some point because when I opened my eyes again, the tent was dimly lit by early morning light. For a second, I almost convinced myself I had imagined the whole thing. But when I stepped outside, the sight made my stomach drop. There were footprints, clear ones, deep in the soft ground circling my tent. Big, heavy boot prints. They came from the woods, walked a slow half-circle around the campfire, then stopped right near the entrance of my tent before turning back into the trees. I stared at them for a long time, feeling that sinking dread spread through my chest. I followed the prints for a few yards, but they faded into the forest floor where the leaves were thicker. Whoever it was had been there, close enough to touch the tent, and I had never heard them leave. I packed fast. I didn't eat, didn't even bother to fold the tent properly. I just stuffed everything into the car as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before getting them in the ignition. When the engine started, the sound felt almost too loud in all that silence. I started down the dirt road, my tires crunching through the fallen leaves. As I drove, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing there, but the road stayed empty. The forest looked endless in every direction, and the cold morning fog made everything blurry and pale. After a few minutes of driving, I saw something on the side of the road that made me slow down. It was a small pile of stones stacked carefully in a triangle shape, maybe 6 or 7 inches tall. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except as I kept driving, I saw another, then another. Each one was the same, small piles of rocks stacked in that same triangle pattern, spaced about 100 feet apart. They looked deliberate, too neat to be random. I counted at least 6 of them before I finally got back to the paved highway. By the time I saw other cars again, my hands had stopped shaking, but my mind was still spinning. For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, how close they had come to the tent, how they circled, how they stopped right by the entrance. Whoever it was hadn't tried to take anything, hadn't made a sound, hadn't even bothered to cover their tracks. They just stood there in the dark, watching. That night, after I checked into a small roadside motel, I sat on the bed scrolling through maps of the area. There weren't any marked trails or campsites anywhere near where I had been. The dirt road didn't even show up on satellite view. It was just endless forest. That realization made it worse. Whoever had been there wasn't lost, and they hadn't stumbled on me by accident. They had gone there for a reason. I told myself I'd never go back into those woods again, but part of me still thinks about it sometimes, about how the silence felt before the first step, about those rocks on the road, about the faint smell of smoke that hung in the air even though I never saw another fire. The scariest part isn't what happened that night. It's what didn't. Nothing touched me, nothing attacked, nothing spoke. Someone came close enough to stand right outside my tent in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, and just watched. They didn't want my stuff. They didn't want to scare me off. They just wanted to watch. That thought still follows me sometimes, that maybe they've done it before to other people camping alone. Maybe those little piles of rocks weren't random at all. Maybe they were marks, small signs of where they had been. And that night, out in the woods, I was just another one of their stops.